Hey everyone, Prince Dabslot here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Delta Green scenario, God's Breath. This scenario can be found inside the God's Hunt Compendium, which is an expansion for God's Teeth campaign, or it can be run separately on its own. This scenario is an excellent example of a conspiracy board, along with a way to make your law players finally feel a little more useful. Without too much further ado, we're going to be going into spoilers. So if you are a player, send this to your handler. And if you're a handler, keep on watching as we go into how I ran the scenario, some of the changes I made, and especially how it ended. And hey, if my videos help you out or you find them entertaining, just hit me with a like and subscribe. A like a day keeps the Illigor away. So if this is helpful, I really appreciate it. I like watching those numbers go up, and I appreciate my audience that's always commenting and giving all their great ideas and information about these scenarios in the comments. And if you've run this or you're looking forward to run this, let me know. Let me know your experience. Let me know how your first read goes. And thanks, everybody. We're going to be going into the scenario now. So the setup for God's Breath involves a prisoner at the Denver prison system vomiting up an alien worm as reported by a friendly before a prison officer lights it on fire and burns it away. Editor's note here, I actually made an audio recording for this friendly phone call to inform the program about what's going on. I'll put it in the Dropbox below, and I'm about to play it. I then proceeded to ascertain the video feed of the cell in question over the right shoulder of the guard. The suspect regurgitated what appeared to be some sort of alien worm, sir. It engaged with the canine unit for a moment, but then visual confirmation was lost when concussion grenades were used. By the time optics had recovered in the security center, the threat had been neutralized by the accidental ignition of a contraband accelerant present in the suspect's cell. This is the setup for what ends up being quite a large conspiracy that your agents can dig into and figure out exactly where this came from, versus being like a bug hunt or something of that nature. So it feels pretty unique in terms of Delta Green, along with a really cool ending. But your players are going to be brought in as Department of Defense investigators because retroactively this victim was tagged as a informant. So it gives your players some guys to ask around and to poke with. So reading this scenario initially, I was inspired by one thing. I've been watching a lot of The Wire lately, and so I wanted to give my players that experience. And when I was reading through this scenario, one thing that also stuck out to me was this is a lot of reading aloud. And if you've watched my videos, you know I've got some speech problems. I think it came free with the dyslexia. So what I did for this scenario, just going into it, so you know off the bat, is I turned everything into handouts. Any passage that could be cut out and I would be reading aloud to my players, I turned into handouts, and I wanted to make this scenario something a little more long-term. I think it took my agents about 2 months in-game to solve this, which was cool because it almost did that montage of stakeouts and let them go do their own thing around and then reconvene and discuss what they found and put all the puzzle pieces together. So again, just going into it, just be aware that I made everything I could into handouts, and I asked my players, how they want to go about it, how they want to go investigate things, and they told me, and then I gave them the handout saying this is after a week, this is after staking out this place, this is yada yada. And it was really cool to show this long timeline of this web coming together and expanding and connecting all these organizations and people, and it really let my agents dig in and have their McNulty moment of figuring stuff out together, and also that long-term stakeout, which I don't think is done very much. Usually Delta Green missions are pretty quick and snappy, so it was cool to have one on the opposite end where it really took some good time to dig into. I also want to add that even though this investigation took us a long time in-game, this only lasts us about 3 sessions, or probably about 9 to 10 hours. So a little bit shorter than I was expecting, but that's not a bad thing. After the initial briefing in this scenario, your agents will go to the prison and interview a security guard that was there that killed the thing that came out of the victim and is trying to actively save himself from the cover-up that is occurring. The footage is going to reveal that this man in respiratory distress started puking up this alien worm, coughing it up,
and it killed the guard's prison dog before he flung in some prison wine and ignited it, killing the thing. This is locked behind a roll to get this, even though my players kind of did all the correct steps, which feels a little bad for such a central clue to be locked behind a roll like that. So what I did is I made it not a roll and just gave it to them with the proper percent that they had and the correct intimidation and the correct pressure being done, because it wasn't exactly a high stakes situation. Just so you know going into this, that there are some clues in this scenario locked behind rolls that don't really have any impact if failed. For example, there's this system in this scenario of growing pressure, of some background problems growing and brewing as your agents poke into places they shouldn't. While this videotape doesn't really have anything to do with that or the gaining pressure, in other ways it makes sense where they still get the clues even if they fail the roll, they just get noticed. This doesn't. So just something to keep in mind with Delta Green philosophy all around rolling. Moving into this, it might be worth a scan and seeing what you want to convert into the flat skill percentages, or providing some impacts to a failed roll while still giving them the clues. The initial investigation is fairly straightforward and pretty quick. Once they get moving on stuff, they're going to want to hit the coroner's office to see the remains of the body and do some examination on that. And they're going to want to see the incident that got this man arrested, who is a child from the cornucopia house, which will come up later in something I expanded on even more. I made sure my players understood the point of that and why it's important. But they're going to want to follow up on him, get as much information as they can, and then once they have the idea that something was A, in the prison food and around the prison, and B, something is inside the weed cartridges that this guy was hitting when he was arrested, that's when they're going to want to hit the ground, and that's when we expand it to the Wire-esque investigation with a whole board and clues and stuff. I'll put the board on the screen now, which I believe this is an important scenario to give your players plenty of ample room to figure stuff out. So this scenario has various ample ways for your players to get onto Avalon Gardens and follow up on the marijuana angle. This scenario is quite interesting because there's so much in here that your agents won't see just based on how they go about investigating this, which is cool, and I love the different angles to the conspiracy. And the scenario kind of ends before the finale in your players presenting all this evidence to their handler and saying how they want to go about attacking this. And the scenario actually has various different ways of ending based on how your agents present this information. It's a little bit railroaded into an assault at the end, but regardless, your agents will have different goals going into the assault based on the information that they found and based on what they tell their handler, which is interesting. And I like the angles of your players really feeling like this government entity coming in and helping covering everything up. Be like, yeah, they're criticizing the police for covering up this unnatural incursion or this murder that occurred, but your agents are going to be doing just the same thing. It puts them on the same level as these prison guards that they're critiquing and this large corporation that they are going to then come in and put another cover up on top of. So this scenario will change quite a bit based on your agents, based on what skills they want to use, and based on how they want to go about doing this long-term investigation. So my agents focused really heavily on the weed angle and then quickly connected it to GAP and went from there. So your experience may differ from mine. I also want to give a special shout out in this scenario for the fantastic D10 tables. This scenario contains quite a bit of tables, and that's not something I usually see in Delta Green, tables to roll on. And I just want to say fantastic stuff here. Some really cool investigative work, some really funny characters, some really cool moments. And I would love to see more random tables from Delta Green, which I've noticed that Caleb Stokes seems to be doing more of, especially in his Dead Circus scenario and stuff like that. So there's some really cool ideas here in these tables that I would love to see more of. So thank you for these neat tables, and would love to see more of these throughout Delta Green. One thing that you'll notice while reading through this scenario, and hopefully not as you run it for the first time, but that's that a lot of this information about the weed and the effects on people and all the strains and stuff is really spread out. I would have liked this to be a little more condensed, not in the writing, but just in the physical layout of it, because I did feel like you're going to do a lot of flipping and hunting for information. So it's worth reading these weed tables and the good trips and seeding this through the scenario, which is tough and is something you just got to read and be aware of how this all works and make a mental note to come back and read these charts when they're doing this or that about the weed. That's not to say they aren't awesome. Like some of the effects, like rolling on the tables and the whole things about what happens when your agents smoke weed, top tier stuff. I really did wish my agents smoked weed, but they were too skeeved out, which I can't blame them for. It was a good call. But this stuff about the weed trips and the effects on people, again, is spread out through the scenario and kind of in these weird interstitial groupings of pages. So just something to keep in mind when you're prepping and reading. And just to expand a little bit on what I mean by the handouts, for example, this grow operation. It's big, it goes onto the next page as well, and it's something that either I can sit here and read this out pretty much verbatim as my players discover it, or I can just give it to my players. I use just a program, just a snippet into another page, and I just print that page out, cut it out, and like I said, that's how we ended up with pounds and pounds of handouts that my players had a great time organizing and stapling together and reading all about. And yeah, sometimes there's skill stuff on them, but that's okay. They know they got it, and they know how skills work, so it's not some big mystery. And another thing you need to be aware of when going through this for handouts is, like, this is a problem I found in the security footage or the medical examiner one, where 99% of it, fantastic for me just to read straight off the page or to give to my players and have them read and compare to each other. But there's one line in the middle that's a spoiler. So you're just going to want to read through this and take a Sharpie and X out anything you don't want your players to know. But I thought that was a great way of handling this scenario. And again, it kept the scenario being from, this is Palmer's reading time to my table. You guys are going to sit here and read and take notes on what I say, and turned into, here's all the information you found from staking this place out for a week, or from investigating this for a week, or from pulling into these tax records for a week, and really show the long-term effects of the investigation. And then they all, again, came together around a whiteboard and sat and basically did read it out to each other, being like, I found there's clear favoritism occurring in this, and they're skimping on their proper testing and lab work and stuff. And I think that was a really cool way that you can run this scenario. It's not going to work for every group, but I really recommend it for this one. Another reason why I did the handout method that I did is it let my players split up and let me physically split up my attention at the table, because, you know, when one agent was off staking something else out, one agent was doing lab work, yada yada. Well, I could say to one agent and tell them what they found while I gave a handout to another agent, while I gave a handout to a third agent. And it was great because it didn't mean they all just had to sit there staring at me, waiting for me to explain what I had to explain. Let's cover a lot of ground at once. The main crux of this investigation is your players will be zeroing in on this Avalon Gardens weed company and weed distillate company. Basically, they're going to, if they have the scent, they're going to smell it off that. Otherwise, they're just going to tie it into some psychotic breaks that have been happening and people talking about it around in the area through the tables and through scouting out and stuff like that, which again is why this scenario kind of takes a while in game, as it takes some time for agents to stake out and watch people coming and going and really doing the full investigative work, which if you've read any of the Delta Green fiction, you know it takes a while, and agents quite often spend some time staking out a place and writing down all the license plates and comparing notes. But regardless, your agents will go into finding out about this Avalon family, finding out that they smoke quite a bit of weed and that their products are very addictive and very strong, and might even have psychoactive elements that almost act like DMT or MDMA in users' brains. And the reason for this is that the company Avalon Gardens, a subsidiary, or I should say the son of one of the other members started of GAP, which is a large pharmaceutical and food corporation that kind of makes processed foods. This company, Avalon Gardens, is a subsidiary, and they have been using the milk of the Shub-Niggurath and its offspring to ferment and grow this weed, giving it this like psychoactive compounds. Honestly, makes the weed alive in a way that's not like a plant, and it is trying to disseminate itself through the market and get more and more users addicted on this long-term timeline. Very spooky stuff, because as your agents can also smoke the weed and figure out a lot of crazy stuff about it. My agents didn't, which is sad. I mean, smart move with them not smoking the weed, because there's some crazy stuff that happens if you smoke this weed, especially if they're teeth of God, which they were. But regardless, this company is basically packaging unnatural into their marijuana products, and so the users get more and more addicted, lose SAN, and basically go crazy over time, which kind of leads into the ending, where these users don't even realize they're at zero SAN or how addicted or under the flow of this plant that they really are. And the company's fine with it because they're, it's kind of a worship of a god. They're following the Shub-Niggurath's nature of fertility and birth and bringing life and all that. So it's a very cool angle. And again, just unnatural, hallucinogenic, addictive marijuana products that just seems like super strong weed at first, but they keep pushing out newer and newer and newer versions of this weed that's more and more addictive and worse and worse and worse. So there are several ways your agents will stumble across this, but they inevitably will. They can go down the money trail, which is kind of fun, if your agents pick up that they're doing massive cash deposits, and then that kind of turns into a raid to steal from this company. Or your agents can do what I did, among various other angles, and that's connected to GAP and bring that to their handler, which will trigger the red alert alarm. Before we go full bore into the ending, we're going to talk a little bit about when they zero in on the management and what happens when they get caught. So we'll start with the management angle. There are several key players that your agents will eventually figure out about: the knights, the head of security, the scientist. And the way the scenario is set up is it's very open, because it's going to give you several ways of finding out about people. That's going to be open source, that's going to be spying, that's going to be disguising themselves, doing whatever. And it is very open as written, and it encourages your players to tell you on how they want to go about using their skills and figuring the stuff out, which is very cool to me. And I like that openness. And this is really when I read this and I was like, oh, this could be a Wire season. So when it gets to this final investigation on these few individuals, again, you're just going to be open about it and encouraging them. I mean, spying, human intelligence can involve everything from physical surveillance, psychological profiling, social mapping, and or interviews. In addition to the human skill, you can learn the same information through skills like criminology, disguise, stealth, or persuade. So it's really open, and you're just going to want to ask your players on how they want to go about doing this, which I like. And then I just gave them the handout about what they found when they did it. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about what happens when they fail some of these rolls, because a lot of this stuff is still rolled on tables through the scenario, but they still get the information. But that means that the management is more and more aware of them looking into. And it's pretty vague and pretty short as written in the book about how you want to go about implementing this and the true punishment. I didn't hold back, really. My agents only failed one key roll, which made the assault pretty high alert and made the management aware and trying to get out of there. Good thing they failed this roll. It was when Minerva Labs still gave them the information but alerted the Avalon Gardens that they were being looked into, which does start the plans to hastily get these seeds and leave and flee from the area to get out from underneath this investigation, which, because they're all crazy cultists, they all worship this seed basically, so they all want to take it and be free. And everyone in the facility that's a heavy user is also insane, so they're all kind of, without knowing it, aware and on the same wavelength and working together. But if your agents fail multiple rolls or are not stealthy, basically they just get tracked down and killed. There's a few ways of doing this. The book recommends even just the security company just stopping them out in the middle of nowhere and just claiming they drew a gun and gunning down your agents, which is cool. I saw the suggestion online, and it's something that I think I would do if my agents failed too many rolls. And what I would do is just take a scene from No Country for Old Men, and if they failed enough rolls, just snap cut to a new group of agents finding the deceased agents in their hotel, just gunned down by the security company, and Tony, sending these agents to say, hey, you got to pick up the pieces where these guys left off. So clearly they were onto something, because they were all just murdered. So I think that'd be a really cool way of doing that, because this is kind of a harsh scenario in terms of there's some weird skills being asked here, and a lot of it is rolled, again, to increase this tension and increase this probability of them failing and getting alerted. So just really up to you on how harshly you want to ramp this up. if they go full bore and reveal themselves, and yeah, don't hold back. Having them be gunned down in traffic for a fake gun pull is a cool moment. Again, you could also do the snap cut, which I really enjoyed, and talking with one of my players afterwards is something they also would have really enjoyed. But again, my players only failed one roll, so I didn't feel like filling one roll on a medicine check for pulling up records was enough to just execute my agents. So I just had the security of the compound be as high as it could be, and all the guards ready to shoot on sight as soon as they arrived, turning it from less of a stealth assault into a full frontal blast. So once your agents have an idea of where this investigation is going, where the unnatural is coming from, the Avalon Gardens grow site, and all the information around that, you're going to want to segue into the Tony presentation. And what I have this be is it's kind of training for the end of God's Teeth, where my players will put together all the information. They came together with their big whiteboard, they called in Tony, and they said, Tony, get in here, we're going to tell you what's going on. And given that my players were on the Tunkashun and the GAP, that's when Tony, boom, gets so interested and so intrigued. There's a really cool scene here in which I made a handout for, and I'll show that right now. So of course, this is only one possibility of many for your teams to present, and this will vary depending on your team. If your agents bring up the GAP, Tony goes crazy, gets incensed. He starts flashing this folder. I made this little folder. I just got some mug shots and some weird occult symbols and shoved them together because Tony's going to go around and show your players this and say, have you seen this? Does this look familiar? Have you seen this? And just seems so insistent about it, and your agents haven't. Which is fine because it sets up more stuff down the road to investigate and kind of connects it to the large Delta Green ecosystem. But your players are going to get flashed this folder, asked if they see anything. They're going to say no, of course, because they don't know anything about it. And then that's when Tony's going to be like, okay, well, we need a full assault on this place. We need to go in. We need to steal as much information as we can about GAP, about Tonkashun, about whatever we can find about these people. I have evidence of terrorist activities we can plant on site to clear it. But regardless, we're going to call in this team to assault. And what's funny is before Tony mentioned the team and my players were just thinking about the assault, my players were all gung-ho and we're like, yeah, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to rush in there. And then as soon as you hand out some of the pre-gens that the scenario came with, it kind of starts that fight or flight. Like, whoa. If a scenario's giving us pre-gens, that means they're probably going to die, right? So it was funny to watch my agents kind of backpedal on that and go in for the assault. But regardless, this scenario does usually end in this assault of a distillate weed compound, which will, of course, go horribly wrong pretty much no matter what, because so many members working there are part of a death cult that they're not even aware of. And so your agents aren't aware of this death cult brewing within this facility. I mean, like I said, the users themselves aren't. They're just going to have psychotic breakdowns when stuff starts to occur. But you're going to bring in this team, this full team of 6. And if your players play the pre-gens, any extras you're going to have, you're going to control as NPCs, which are great as some good cannon fodder. And this is one where I actually brought in a friend who had never tried Delta Green before, and it was quite the fun experience to bring them in for this finale assault that they didn't really know what was going on, but they just knew they were here to kill shit, which is perfect attitude for these kill team guys. They're all really well written, they all have pretty interesting stuff going on, they get interesting stats, and your agents can assist in any way they see fit. But one thing I should have done more is had my players roleplay more as these guys that kind of just came in and performed the assault, which we'll go into. But there's some really cool roleplay opportunities in here and some really great writing for these characters that I really enjoy. There's the whole one about entering the hut at the end of the world after seeing the mathematical equations of heaven and realizing you can't enter the hut without blood on your hands, and that's why one of these people joined Delta Green. And that's just a great little almost SCP-esque nugget of writing that I really, really enjoyed. My players really, really enjoyed. And I'm just going to segue that into talking a little bit about the writing of this scenario, and that's that it is super strong. All the lines in here about, they got to watch out for the smoke, good data goes up in smoke, the hut at the end of the world, stuff like that. That is a reason why I turned this scenario into such a handout heaven, because, again, some of this writing is just really, really good, and I wanted my players to read it and not hear it from my mouth. They can read it off the page, because I'm just going to be reading all of this stuff off the page anyway, because it's just that good. Back on track. Your players will end the scenario with an assault on this weed distillate compound, basically secretly a death cult. that will go wrong, and this is where your players can spend some good time planning and attacking. My players did get the camera feeds, so I gave them this map handout, and I'll show a picture of it on the screen of how we did it with cubes, and that was really nice, is to just play this with cubes on the table like a map and let them visualize exactly where they were and where they were going and how they were assaulting and who was where, because they had active camera feeds and stuff like that. There are a few ways you can run this, so by no means is the way that I ran it the 100% correct way, definitive way to run it. It was a little messy, and I do have some criticisms on how it's written. For a compound that almost feels like kind of an OSR death dungeon, it's written very linearly because it's set up kind of assumed that your agents or the pre-gens or however you want to do it will go about this one way, and like the room by room clear and zip tying everyone and then everything going to shit, versus kind of this high alert compound that's already aware of being investigated and ready to attack. So you're going to want to play with it just based on your group's experiences. And I listened to the original podcast of the author running this, and again, was still kind of messy. So that's what my criticisms are. If this is written and presented kind of like a death dungeon, which it is, I would have liked to see the author take some cues from possibly other like OSR or other similar dungeon writings with possibly I mean, like I said, I loved the D10 tables earlier. This would be a great place to implement some D10 tables. Just something to keep in mind, that the way it's written and the way your agents kind of presented room by room is not really how it's going to go down if this is a high wire assault. Like I said, shooting started pretty much instantly, and it kind of went to shit in terms of like descriptions, and the room by room clear very much just turned into this assault, this large scale firefight. And that's going to be the beginning of the section that I am going to lovingly call God's Assault, because I hallucinated that was the name. And it's badass, so that's what I'm doing. I'm going to post the playlist me and my players came up with for this assault, and it was fun to get them into it the week before the session of like, yeah, we're going on this like awesome raid, and it's going to be high wire, and here's the doom music and everything like that. And it really was a cool experience that felt different than the usual. We're going to take this so slow and so low key. We're going to be breaching walls, we're going to be breaching doors, we're going to be going in full bore. So what happened with this assault is that my players actually split up from the Delta team, and my players went and got the father, Bill Knight. They pulled him over, and taking a cue from the suggested way of killing them, they pulled him over, claimed there was a gun, which that was their plan, but he came out shooting from his car because he was actually ready to flee the country with all the seeds. And he has his rifle in the car with him. So I had them roll alertness to see if they noticed him digging in his car, which they didn't when they pulled him over. And he pulled out a rifle and started gunning at them. So they were happy they had a group, but they got into a firefight with him on the road, and they basically gunned him down and lit his car on fire. Now, before he was shot to death, he did text his son the Alamo code, which his son then received, and then they saw on the security cameras they were watching his son stand up and start to make his way over to Y6, and that's when they're like, we got to go for the assault. C4 on the doors, let's blow it and breach our way in and start screaming, get down. And they did a good job of civilian control, and this is where another one of my influences coming through. I've been playing a lot of Ready or Not lately, which is a cop kind of SWAT simulator. So I actually found that pretty enlightening to how this is going to go. Not that that game is particularly realistic, certainly more than like Call of Duty or the like, but it shows a good handle of like how to get control of civilians and how to breach doors and proper stack up procedures and stuff. So it really gave me some good insight on how to run this, kind of like how a Spec Ops team would assault a facility. So moving into this facility, I'm going to go over how all the ways most of them died. Out of the 6 Delta team that went in, 2 walked out. Doc was instantly gunned down by John Bellamy once the main room, Y3 room, was breached. John Bellamy was sitting there with a rifle they knew, and he just got some crazy critical hit and blasted her for like 25 damage. Brutal. So she died instantly. She was not a player at my table. She was one of the ones I was controlling, which was funny. And honestly, if my player would have been controlling her, I would have handed off another one of the NPCs for my player to control, just because we had extras, versus making them sit there and watch everyone else enjoy this assault that they died on turn 1. So they started this gunfight down the hallway. There were several guards that were armed. They assigned Denver PD to go shut down the other guard trucks, so they had that kind of taken care of and weren't worried about an assault coming from behind. But they did get into a gunfight with these guards who are fairly lethal. None of the civilians were going crazy yet. None of the users were going crazy yet. They all kind of just sat there, and one agent kind of corralled them, pointing his gun at them, telling them to get down. He didn't zip tie them or anything, but he did kind of corral them and make sure that they weren't getting flanked. While the other group moved up, I had 2 assault from the back in this restricted lot area, and I had Dakota Knight running as quick as he could during his turn to the Y6 grow house, which he did release. He eventually got there through the gunfight after several rounds of fighting through this facility. He got there, and he flung open the doors, causing all the pollinators to pour out. And now, as he did this, as the pollinators poured out, that is when Isha was stabbed. Just no roll needed, just stabbed in the throat by one of the insane users that all start waking up. I kind of had them like seizing on all the cameras, all the heavy users, before they like got up and just started almost zombie mode, horde mode rushing. And it was a great moment of tension and horror and head and hands. Oh my God, we've totally lost this. When again, we're using this as a map. We had cubes on the table to show who and what was where, which again, I would recommend extremely heavily just because it's so nice not to be redescribing room by room and where everyone is. And it kind of, if you're doing these tactical shootouts, it's really nice to have an overview of just dumping. Oh, here's 5 cubes here. Here's 5 cubes here. Here's 6 cubes here. Just showing all the users turning. And that was just a great moment of, oh, we're so fucked, aren't we? And it kind of became this horde assault of trying to back out of the facility as quick as possible, gunning away. And they really debated calling in the airstrike from Tony before they had the GAP files, which I planted in Dakota Knight's office for them to find. And I actually had a whole write-up of the files that they found, which I'll share and go into later at the end of this. But they knew that was their goal, was to find these files and to kill anyone, any user and Dakota Knights and all that stuff. And they also wanted to capture the scientist as well. So Isha was then stabbed by the throat. Husky was trying to start a fire inside the Y6 grow house and plant C4 and kill a bunch of the users, which she did successfully. She planted C4 in this door here and blew up a bunch of them as they ran out, which was a cool moment. Lethality 10% or something like that. We looked it up. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it killed a bunch of heavy users and started a fire, which my players also, I let them use demolitions, and they went through these cars and I had them roll luck rolls, see if they could find motor oil or something in it, which they asked for, and that's why I love the luck system. But they asked for if there were motor oil in here, and they passed the luck check, and they were able to use their demolition to rig up kind of a Molotov cocktail kind of thing out of their flashbangs, which I had them roll demolition to see if it was took them 1 round or 2 rounds to do successfully, how long it took them to rig that up. One of my agents fumbled that, so I made his bomb have a 50-50 chance of going off when he threw it anyway. But regardless, one of them, while lighting the C4 and blowing themselves up, they were starting to be eaten alive by pollinators, which was great. I cut to the picture of the cover, so it was really cool to have the cover of God's Hunt come into play. And then, as this fire was starting spreading, one of my agents, while raiding Dakota Knight's office, had a final confrontation with Dakota Knight, who appeared and spewed his intestines all over this person and poisoned him, and he died in this poison while he lit Dakota Knight on fire at the same time. So it was a cool kind of like final send-off, and he died as Fudd came in to help, but then panicked and froze, which is so tragic because of all the characters, Fudd wants to go down a blaze of glory, but he saw Dakota Knight spewing his intestines, he saw his teammate dying of poison, writhing on the ground, and he ran away. So bleak. That's when it was fantastic. But they eventually did set the fire in the grow house, thus calling back all the pollinators from the facility to the grow house and all the heavy users piling on it. Because lighting this fire in the grow house number 6, really is the win condition that they're not aware of going into it, but that's what your agents need to do to get out of this facility. Another thing I want to emphasize about this raid is you want to keep the heavy drug users, being taken over or waking up in your back pocket. To expand a little bit on that, for those who haven't read this scenario, basically anyone that's a heavy user of this plant is unknowingly kind of subjecting themselves to the control of it. And when shit hits the fan and the plant hits fight or flight mode, it's going to basically trigger a massive drug blast in all of these users, kind of sending them into like a psychedelic haze in which they kind of turn it again into that like zombie kind of just rush down to kill your players, gripping anything. And they're not just like going to beat them death with their fists, but they're going to like grab pencils and knives and scissors and accelerant and acid and anything they can do to just like murder your players. You're going to keep this in the back pocket for just when your players feel like they have control of the situation. Right when they think, oh, we see Knight, we got him down. And of course, Knight's going to keep healing himself every turn, almost like a Terminator character as well. So it's a great hand-in-hand moment of the Knight twitching on the ground, them moving in to capture or whatever, and that's when the stab happens and everyone goes crazy. And that's when it's, oh my goodness, we are so screwed. And just some general tips for running this stuff that I found kind of conflicting as we came up, and that's that you are going to want to play this pretty flexible. Like I said, for a book that in a scenario that kind of sets up all these different ways of going about the scenario and different ways of assaulting and all the different goals of telling Tony this and that, the actual writing for the assault was pretty stiff, which just felt a little incongruent with the way it was setting it up. So you're just going to want to read this, and you kind of got, what I did is I had my own personal map and I wrote down how many people are in the room and how many of those people are heavy users, so that when they broke out, I could access my map and see exactly how many cubes and how many people I wanted to spawn places, and that just sped it up. You're going to want to pre-write all these initiatives, and I put the pollinators in there and the heavy users ahead of time, so it was easy just to run down a list and go. But again, you're just going to want to read this, and I would kind of more read this as a dungeon versus as the room by room clear that it's kind of setting up. And chances are when your agents go into this, it will be a heavy duty, fully frontal assault, because I didn't want to give them a chance to, disarm the guards, especially with them failing the roll previously and people being more aware of them. So just something to keep in mind. And you're going to want to play this kind of fast and loose, especially with some of the fire rules and stuff and letting them cross stuff, because really it's about setting this like cool assault scene versus being incredibly granular about it. I made this handout, which I will post in the Dropbox below, but I made this handout to stand in as the files because I have no interest in running a campaign within a campaign within a campaign of them continuing down this GAP Yerba Loco timeline, but I kind of wanted to tie it in more to the overall campaign, which it feels like is a little lacking. So what I did is I just gave them, this kind of generic, this is what they found, this is what the handout says kind of thing, and I just gave them some initiative information on biotechnology innovator, genetic agricultural products incorporated. This is just from the book. I gave them some information about how it's tied to Yerba Loco. I gave them some stuff on Tong Shukaran, made up of Tucho, worships of Shugaran. And I also gave them some hints that this cult knows that this entity rose into existence in 1969 when the Tucho drove off government force that identifies Delta Green in Operation Obsidian, thus tying in into more Delta Green lore. If you read the novels or read a lot of the lore, this was this famous failed assault that led to Delta Green going underground. So it was very cool to tie that in. I even tied in Adolf Lepus here, who some of my players know from my previous games, my players, not my agents, along with the fact that they think this entity might be a god known as Nyarlathotep, and this Nyarlathotep led them to show up Nivaroth, and then some stuff on the Hidi Nigritti, and then I kind of tied this in with a final passage that my teeth only for, and my way of doing this was kind of, this information will lead to the destruction of the cult. The program will lead a campaign against Tong Shukron like the hounds they are. Like the first domino falling, this war will be fought against them far beyond your lifetime. To gain the insight, you gain the insight that this was Bast's goal. Decades of succulent feeding await the hidden god because of your actions. She smiles upon you. Because I think the general gist of this, and what I kind of wanted to imply by my campaign that I feel like could have used a little more implication in the writing for God's Hunt, is the idea that yes, they've graduated full-grown teeth, and they are simply putting stuff in motion to feed Bast. And it kind of shows them that Bast doesn't really care about their initiative. Like I said, they're just the domino falling. Bast is happy to keep feeding forever on these other supernatural entities, and this is kind of why the kid was involved from the cornucopia house. His goal in Bast's ecosystem was to grow up, get involved in the unnatural, and drag the teeth back in, thus feeding Bast, thus continuing the loop of Bast's whole ecosystem and our whole cycles and yada yada, all the classic fate stuff that exists in this campaign. And so something like this, I just whipped this up about 20 minutes before my game, so I'm sure you could do better, but just an idea of how you want to increase the emphasis of your agents and their actions and why this is in God's Teeth campaign, why this exists in for them, which again, I feel like could use a little bit more emphasis in the God's Hunt book. And that's going to be God's Breath as a whole. I'm going to go into some more general advice here, and that's that there is a lot of information in this book. This is one you should read, and reread again, and then be prepared for your agents to never find it. Again, with my handout method, I actually went through and I paper clipped all of the handouts to the exact place they're going to be in the book. So it made it easier for me just to flip to that page, open it up, and hand it to my agent when they did that or said they want to investigate into this. And that really helped a lot. But this is one you're going to want to really read and reread and learn all of the angles so that when your agents ask some wild question, you know the answer to. And again, with the assault, you're going to want to read, reread, and read how the assault's going to go and all the rules about the pollinators and stuff. And those rules are there for you to use or not, how you want to do it. I implemented some of it, and some of it I just came up with on the fly as a fairly experienced DM and handler as my players played. The writing of the scenario is really good, and I really enjoyed how the scenario really made my agents that studied law and bureaucracy and some medicine and all these other skills that you really don't see come up a lot in other Delta Green scenarios. They felt really useful here, and that was really cool. And I love scenarios that encourage these weird skills to be used and to encourage the physicist agents and the mathematician agents to figure out stuff and continue from there. I also really enjoyed the weed angle, if you can't tell, because it's just so interesting. And for a campaign that's pretty leftist and that's not a criticism at all, that has a lot to say about American society and American rights erosions and the way American institutions kind of increase this like cycle of abuse, and truly how the unnatural is just a player in these games that's really run by humans. I mean, some of the darkest stuff in here is entirely done by humans. I never thought I would see a campaign go into the criticisms of marijuana as something that's generally associated, for better or for worse, with the left, talking all about how these companies push through all this stuff that really shouldn't have been pushed through, and how money rules. They stomped over everything. They stomped over mom and pop shops, how it's just all about politics and the money, and there really isn't any good in here. I think that's a really intriguing angle that me and all my players really enjoyed, especially as people that live around the area. It was cool to have a campaign set around our hometowns and able to reference some sights and sounds local to the scene, and just something that you don't really think about that often when it comes, or at least I didn't think about that often when it comes to marijuana, the industry around it and its consumption, and the effect on politics and money. I do think the scenario could have had some more direct ties into the campaign, and that's kind of one of my general criticisms of God's Hunt as a whole. A lot of it feels like there could have been done more to rope it in and make it clear what is occurring. Maybe I'm just dense, maybe my player's just dense, maybe some combination of all that. But I definitely feel like there could have been more here. There could have been more creepy synchronicities that were occurring kind of previously in the campaign. There could have just been more God's Teeth stuff in here. So if you can think of anything to shove in here, really go about and do it. Unfortunately, I will be skipping God's Law due to some real life timing constraints, but that just means we get to get to God's Light even quicker, which I'm so excited about. I will go back and run God's Law one day as a separate standalone scenario, but as of right now, we're going into God's Law and then into the finale. So stay subscribed, and you can watch me talk about that scenario when I get to it, which should be tons of fun. It is truly a scenario I am so excited for. But that's going to bring us to a close. Thanks for watching this video. I appreciate it. Again, if you've ran this or you're looking to run this, let me know in the comments. Let me know how it goes. Let me know what you're expecting. If you have any questions, concerns, or follow-ups, I would love to hear all about them. Thanks for my subscribers. I'm almost at 500. That's a huge number that I never expected to be at. And I really, truly appreciate everyone that watches these videos and gets involved. I love seeing that notification ping for a new comment, and I love seeing what people have to say in this great little Delta Green community. So without too much further ado, thanks again, and I'll see you next time.